Street Fighter's visual identity wasn't built by a single artist. Over the decades, artists like Bengus, Akira Yasuda, Kinu Nishimura, and Daigo Ikeno didn't only lay the groundwork of the visual style, but how it felt. From Yasuda's foundational character designs and emphasis on strong silhouettes, to Nishimura's expressive storytelling and vibrant color work. From Bengus's explosive energy and bold compositions, to Ikeno's painterly style and larger-than-life character portrayals. Each artist brought something different to the table. Together, they created one of the most recognizable visual identities in gaming. I've already covered Bengus in the Fighting Game Artist compilation. Thus, we take a look at the design philosophy of Akira Yasuda, also known as Akiman. He once said, "I think game characters should be stolen whenever possible." Most people like seeing familiar figures duking it out in fighting games. Think Masatatsu Oyama versus Musashi Miyamoto, for example. But we can't do that directly. So instead, we create characters that possess those popular figures' most identifiable characteristics. I think this sort of stealing is an important part of character design work. Street Fighter is constantly reinventing its visual identity. Even during the Street Fighter II era, the artwork style changed dramatically between releases. The original game relied heavily on Liquitex paints, Champion Edition leaned more toward watercolor techniques, while Turbo adopted a cell art approach with cleaner color separation and sharper forms, and so on. In Yasuda's case, this was entirely intentional. He often said he wanted to keep evolving as an artist and never felt tied to a single style or even a single franchise. What remained consistent, however, was his approach to character design. Yasuda helped lay the groundwork for Capcom's internal anatomical guide. Character proportions, hand and foot sizes, and body ratios were carefully determined to maximize split-second recognition during gameplay. When we look at the illustration work, in my eyes, Yasuda's style is that he constantly tries to bring out the essence of a character by pushing angles, energy, and motion. His illustrations often feel like snapshots taken at the most exciting moment possible, capturing in the moment, so to say. Because during his Street Fighter era, his technical details such as line work and coloring style are constantly changing, I unfortunately can't really pinpoint recurrent technical tropes. But I might be wrong, but there is a sense of intensity to his work. And as far as I can tell, it's still there to this day. Characters have a strong presence with a somewhat sharp face most of the time. When I start drawing, the character becomes different from the one I originally had in mind. Design differs from illustration as it involves translating a plan into a drawing. Therefore, I wouldn't take into consideration my personal tastes or the current trends. I'd look at the important parts of the brief, as if I were to deviate from the original concept just a little bit. The repercussions would become considerable years after. So I want to make it right. From what I've read, Capcom's art director regularly pushed Yasuda to make every piece more interesting. As a result of raising the floor, Yasuda became a major source of inspiration for the entire Capcom art team. A question he frequently asked himself was, is this cool enough? While the team as a whole shaped the personalities and identities of the cast, I personally think Yasuda was exceptionally good at portraying particularly Chun-Li and the OG Ryu. One could even argue he drew them better than anyone else. Therefore, I wasn't surprised to read that he was also responsible to explain the character cast to newcoming artists in his department. Nonetheless, all Capcom artists seem to struggle with certain characters, which is different for each one. Especially guest artists such as Takuji Kawano, known for his work on Tekken and Soul Calibur, noted that drawing Chun-Li, Ryu and Ken felt nerve-wracking, trying to meet the incredibly high standards set by the original character designers. Back during the Street Fighter II era, before he became a freelancer, Yasuda actually proposed a more anime-inspired visual style. However, the team wanted Street Fighter to maintain a stronger Western appeal in order to sell more units. Then, Samurai Showdown, which was heavily inspired by manga aesthetics, performed very well in the West. This helped convince the team to experiment with a different direction, eventually leading to Street Fighter Alpha. While Yasuda didn't work on the Alpha series, but did work on many crossovers and other game titles, he did say, "Design work is all about filling the various boxes of the world, with a unique blend of emotion and skill." He explained further that anime and video game art belong to entirely different boxes. Anime art is generally cleaner and more straightforward because it needs to remain readable and practical for animation. Video game art, on the other hand, tends to be denser and more detailed. In his words, it is heavy rather than light, and complex rather than simplistic. Yasuda said he from time to time experiments with all kinds of mediums, from traditional oil paints to digital media, to express his art and see where he can push his work. Many of Capcom's artists actually made their work denser because of Yasuda's influence. When reading the interview transcripts in the art books, you can really feel the internal competition that existed during those early years. The artists carefully analyzed each other's work, constantly pushing themselves to maintain a high standard while preserving Street Fighter's visual identity. And honestly, that's one of the most fascinating things about Capcom's art team. These artists weren't working in isolation. They were constantly inspiring, studying, and sometimes even copying one another. For example, Nishimura said she was inspired by the anime-style coloring in the Sakura illustration by Bangus. Bangus himself said he carefully studied Ikeno's coloring, describing it as thick and precise. Meanwhile, Ikeno admitted that he often tried to imitate Bangus's work, only to feel like he failed miserably. They even joked about that Capcom Street Fighter art is made by one person for this very reason. So what about Daigo Ikeno, the man who shaped most of Street Fighter 4? The thing is, Ikeno admitted he's not a huge fan of coloring. He studies it deliberately, paying close attention to how his peers balance hues and contrasts. And despite not loving it, he has developed a very painterly look that sets his work apart. Second, he's known for using different perspectives in a single image, cramming in as many characters as possible without choking them to death. He also admitted he's not very confident drawing women, which is why, as he himself noted, that he tends to exaggerate the male-to-female ratio in group shots. At one point he said, "When I draw any character, I do my best to really emphasize what it is that makes a given character unique. I start off by making them strong, then add each character's individual cuteness, or flash, or whatever defines them." One observation about this is that the eyes in his characters are always intense. He often uses sharp, angled hunter eyes. Very deliberate, very bold. Also adding angular eyebrows to increase the intensity. Pair that with grounded, powerful body language and you get what I'd call his strong draft work. But then he softens it. He humanizes the characters, adds a bit of playfulness. Moreover, he also noted he tries to visualize fun factor in his artworks. And it's true, his illustrations are filled with little comedy skits between characters. And to me, that's the mark of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. About that, him as being the art director for Street Fighter 4, you'll notice it leans more Western in influence. That's because he worked with an outsourced team, and part of his job was translating his 2D vision into 3D models based on the Street Fighter 2 style. So he adjusted the base designs to better fit that pipeline. I couldn't find much about his specific art tools, but I remember reading he mainly works digitally as it saved him a lot of time. One area where I think he really shines, though, is his super deformed chibi designs. They're expressive, hilarious, and full of personality. This type of visual storytelling in his work reminds me like a mix between Bangus's boldness and Kinu Nishimura's elegance. However, his core is, I think, more aligned what I see in Yasuda's character design philosophy. I have to take great care to actually keep myself restrained so that I don't screw these characters up by allowing too much of my own personal taste into what I'm doing. That said, these characters really give me a lot to work with, so I'm able to draw out new aspects of their personality and appeal that may not have been center stage until now. I'm working within limits, but the space I have to play around in is actually quite vast. So when he was asked about how he approached the designs of more restricted characters like Ken and Ryu in his illustrative works, he said, "From my point of view, they are complete and perfect as they are. I couldn't imagine adding something to this sublime blend of characteristics. On the surface, they may seem simple, lacking in distinguishing characteristics. But isn't this simplicity, characters boiled down to their bare essence, the very thing that lends them their uniqueness? I could only hope that I'd manage to design such simple perfection in my career. This is my ultimate goal as an artist." And what was Kinu Nishimura's take on the iconic duo? To paraphrase her, she found Ryu surprisingly difficult to draw. By that point, he was already so well established that there were strict expectations for how his personality should be expressed. Ken, on the other hand, felt much more flexible and expressive, which made him one of her favorite characters to illustrate. Part of Nishimura's struggle with Ryu was that she wasn't always convinced she captured his intended character as accurately as artists like Yasuda could. That's because she places enormous importance on conveying the right attitude and emotion through her characters. In several interviews, she explained that she naturally gravitates toward creating lively, playful atmospheres. As a result, drawing stern, ultra-serious tough guys doesn't always come naturally to her. Yet that contrast is also what makes her interpretation so interesting. To quote her, "All my peers have their own art styles, and it really comes down to whether a game fits an individual's style. No matter how much you resist, your individuality will always come out in a work, which I see as a positive thing. It's both interesting and painful, but I'm most stimulated by looking at the works of other artists who are way better than me, and observing how my own art has leveled up over time. I look back at my own work and think, I can't believe I drew this. And I can clearly recognize what was lacking in my old approach. Actually, there are times where I'll create something that's pretty close to what I envisioned, and in that moment I'm like, I might actually be a genius. But after a week or so, I'm back to ugh. However, when we check her true art style that she showcases in promotional illustrations, we observe a thing or two. She draws the eyes big with widespread pupils that contain white catchlights in the center. She emphasizes the outlines to make the eyes more expressive, effectively conveying the emotions she wants to portray. Furthermore, in most of her work, she fades out details like the under eyelids and tear ducts. Another thing to note is that she does not shy away of expressing eyelashes. This adds to depth and makes the eyes stand out more. When we switch to features like the nose, she tends to draw them with a slight tilt, leaving out the center, which reduces the attention so that the mouth and eyes stand out more. Indeed, she wants to emphasize the expression of the character. As of yet, she is the winner on this department. Her art tells their own story. I mean, look at this illustration of an arcade hall where Mega Man is beating the shit out of Ryu. Also here, she shows the fierce competition between the girls. Moreover, this one pretty cool from the first Marvel vs. Capcom. Morgan flirting with Mega Man while Roll doesn't like it one bit. Ryu and Jin eyeing down the confident, loud Captain Commando, while Strider knows who's boss. Like her peers, she's excellent at body postures. Actually, she is one of those artists who doesn't shy away from doing angles and complex silhouettes. This stimulates more dynamic illustrations as a whole, while she dives into the nitty-gritty connections with them all. One thing we have to talk about is Nishimura, her line art. Especially her Street Fighter 2 art has this fast, sketchy style with strong contrast to make them pop. She creates a good balance between the detail and simplified forms to make the silhouette easily readable. In this case, her characters look so intense that you just don't want to mess with them. And when we check it out, we can all respect that. Her art breathes soul and energy. So what about her use of colors? First off, she said that coloring was not her strength, and more the second part of the work. She actually noted that she wished that people could admire her final illustrations as much as she tried to convey her intentions at the original first sketch. Nishimura said that she doesn't use any particular tools, but she does like vibrant, saturated colors. In an interview, she noted that she was originally trained in Japanese-style paintings and is familiar with transparent watercolors. For a thick, heavy touch, she used acrylics. For tighter work, she used alcohol-based Copic markers and color ink. For pencil drawings, she used commercially available manga manuscript paper. For marker work, she copies the drawing onto color paper, and for materials requiring a lot of water, she uses thicker paper, avoiding rough surface paper. To quote her, "I try to avoid getting hung up on details and losing sight of my original goals and inspirations. Sometimes everything fits together well, but I've lost track of my original intent." But to release you with a direct quote of Nishimura, my message to the aspiring illustrators out there is to do your best to walk whatever path you believe is right for you. Flexibility and being true to oneself are key. Of course, these weren't the only artists shaping Street Fighter. Capcom's art team was packed with talented illustrators, many of whom pushed each other to improve. Artists like Edian and Daichan may not be the names most fans immediately recognize, but their influence can still be felt throughout Capcom's artwork. Edian became known for his adaptability, his careful use of shadows, and his obsession with making characters feel alive. Daichan, meanwhile, approached illustrations more emotionally, focusing less on technical perfection and more on creating mood, feeling, and personality. Like many Capcom artists of the era, both were highly critical of their own work and constantly compared themselves to their peers. In a studio filled with talent, standing still simply wasn't an option. This was game art, and man, every time I revisit Street Fighter, I learned something new. One thing that really stood out to me while researching this video was how often the artist talked about Street Fighter's influence on video game art as a whole. Back then, hardware limitations left much of the characters to the imagination, and it was the artwork that filled in the gaps. Through manuals, magazines, posters, and art books, artists could show these characters in different situations, different moods, different sides of their personalities. In many ways, the artwork didn't just support the games, it helped define them.